Hello my flying friends, hope you're doing well. I've had several requests to explain about my settings that I use on my two quads, the Diatone Taycan with the DJI, and then the Lumineer QAV R2 also with the DJI, on how I set these up to do my smooth cinematic flights, the hashtag peaceful moment. So let's dive in. I'll have timestamps below in the description so you can jump to your favorite section. So I'm going to first start talking about my Lumineer QAV R2 quad. I decided to go with the Hero 6 Black, and I based that on the video I saw on Finke FPV. He does amazing footage and so forth, and does a lot of stuff for cinematic work for clients. And I liked how he said you can hard mount the GoPro. So this comes with the original mount that came with the GoPro, the double-sided 3M sticky tape, and I just put a little extra zip tie around here just to kind of keep it secure. If I do want to snip the zip tie and take the GoPro mount off and put something else there, I can do so very easily. The GoPro is running the version 1.6 firmware, and we'll go into that in the Real Stead Go section of this video. So let's get started. So here, it's pretty close to the stock settings that came with it. You do notice the RC rate is quite a bit lower than normal. For pitch and roll, I'm at 0.45, so that's extremely low, and 0.68 on yaw, so I want to be able to yaw quicker around objects. The super rate is 0.75, 0.7, and 0.55, and then again I have 0.3 on expo. So this really helps to smooth it out, and you can see my pitch is 360 degrees per second, my roll is 300, and my yaw is around 300 or so. So I like to fly my smooth cinematic stuff with the settings around 300-ish. I am flying this in acro, so the angle and horizon settings doesn't matter for this. So next we're going to get into the Taycan. When I first started flying this one, this is my first ducted or sitting whoop quad that I had, and I had quite a bit of learning curve with it, because when I go to land, if I didn't shut off the motors, it would just flip over immediately, and sometimes I got some scuffs on my GoPro camera and quad. But I found out that's kind of a normal thing with sitting whoops, not all of them possibly. But so this particular setup has the same, similar to the QAV, where it has a hard mounted for the GoPro Hero 6 and zip tie again just to help it be a little more secure. I'm running the stock propellers that came with it, and I fly a 4S 1500 milliamp battery on it. I do like the fact that I can change the angle of the camera fairly easy if I want to, and then I also have filters that I put on it. So I ended up going with the Freewell filter pack. So it comes with a 4-pack filter, neutral density ND4, 8, 16, and 32. Because on my GoPro I use ProTune and fix my ISO and shutter speed, I use the neutral density filters to compensate for the light according to the day. So such as if it's an early morning light, if I'm flying within the trees, it's fairly dark in there, I'll probably use a ND4. If it's a little bit brighter, I'm going outside of the tree shaded area, I might use an ND8. But on a normal sunny condition when I'm just flying around, I'll use an ND16 as the first setting, and that seems to work really well for what I have set up. And we'll go into the settings of the GoPro later on. So let's jump into the Betaflight settings for the Taycan. Because the micro USB connector is on the bottom, I did have to buy a special right angle connector in order to fit it in there, and I am able to slide it through the top and then plug it in to the bottom. So we go under the PID tuning, the rate section. So I'm using 1.0 on all three settings, super rate of 0.35, that way if I do need to cut just a little bit sharper on a corner I can do that, and 0.3 on the expo, just so it has a little bit more smoothing, so that it gives me overall about 300 degrees per second on my motors. So it's pretty slow, and I don't want to do any fast changes. When I first started flying the Taycan, I was in acro mode, and having kind of mixed results. But once I just switched it to angle mode, where I have the stability of it, it flies much better for me, and it allows me to get the smooth movements that I want. So in angle mode, I have the setting on 40 for the strength. So pretty simple on the settings. I did use the sliders to change the D and I just a little bit from the stock settings. So first we're going to talk about the Freewell neutral density filters that I use. So this is an ND4, and if you look at, it's like sunglasses. It cuts down the glare of the light hitting the sensor. So that's a 4. I use that pretty much in like early morning in the forest. This is an ND8. So in comparison, there's the 4, there's the 8. So it cuts down on more light. The 16 is what I use on a normal sunny day. You can tell that it really cuts down on the light. And 32, you're not even going to be able to see it there. It's just really, really dark. So I like using the Freewell because it basically just slides right over like that. Nice, good, strong fit. So you can see here I have my set to video, the resolution 2.7K at 4.3. You use the 4.3 if you're using the Real Steady Go feature. I like the recording at 60 frames per second, and if you look at these still frames, this was an example where my camera was on auto, and if you look at one single frame, see how all the blades of grass are pretty sharp, because the shutter speed might have been around 800th of a second. In this example, I have my shutter speed locked at 1/60th of a second, and I'm using my neutral density filter. So here you can see I have nice motion blur on my image, and when you play it back at normal speed in your video, you end up with a nice smooth cinematic feel. Alright, slide to the right. So I fixed my shutter. Instead of leaving it on auto, I've set it to 1/20th of a second. And what you do is you basically, whatever frame rate that you're setting here for recording, I'm recording at 60 frames per second, I need to be twice that. So my shutter speed is 1/20th of a second. White balance, I like to shoot in native. You can, if you want to, fix it to a 6500. That would be used for like a cloudy day, 6000 or 5500 for a sunny day. I like doing native because I do color correction in Final Cut Pro afterwards. Sharpness, I've got it on medium. Color, I like to use flat versus the GoPro. If you're not going to be editing your footage, you probably want the GoPro settings there, but I like to use flat, and then I apply a LUT afterwards to color correct and get me back to whatever settings I would like. Audio is medium, and then here's where I lock in the ISO minimum. I go all the way down to 100 because most of the time I'm flying during the daytime. I want to have it as low ISO, which is less noise. Then ISO max, I also, instead of doing it on auto or as the highest 6400, I put it on 100 as well. So what this tells the camera is I do not want you to change your ISO speed, keep it at 100. And I want to fly at a fixed shutter speed, have a white balance of native, and I use a neutral density like ND16 or ND8. And then, so as I'm flying around, if I'm pointing towards the sun, the image is not going to be becoming dark all of a sudden. It's going to be consistent exposure throughout the entire flight, and then I can change it later on if needed. Video stabilization must be off in order to use the Real Steady Go. Auto low light, I don't have that on. And manual audio control should be your choice. So one other thing when I show you under the preferences, I turn the GPS off because I don't want to have the GPS system messing with the sync data of the stabilization or the flight record. So when you're using Real Steady Go, I felt that having the GPS turned on messed with the settings of the Real Steady Go, and it didn't get as good smooth results, so I just turned it off, and that seemed to help, in addition to flying with a neutral density filter so that it automatically corrected. So that's my settings in the GoPro. So the first example, I want to show you this shaky footage I had on the sides when I left the GoPro in auto settings. I was still in firmware 1.6, but because I had shutter speed auto and I think the GPS was still turned on, I was not getting good results. Alright, in this first example, this is the GoPro that I got that I did not put the firmware 1.6 on. This is the original that came from the refurbished, which is like 2 point something. And you notice all these green keyframes. With the later firmware, it has to put a keyframe every so often in order to get smooth footage. Now in this example, I have firmware 1.6 loaded on the GoPro, and you notice by default it only gives me 2 green keyframes here, one near the beginning and one near the end. You can go to the keyframe, you can right click and you can say adjust, and what it'll do is it'll play a section there. You want to look at the foreground footage versus the background footage to see if it is in alignment or if it is not shaking. And if it is, you can adjust this sync point forwards or backwards, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hit cancel, and I could usually just go to that point, hit play, and I can see from there, okay, that's a good point to have a sync point. And I come to this one and I'm moving there, and that's moving forward, so that's a good sync point there too. Sometimes if you're like turning or yawing around, that may not be the best place to put a sync point. With firmware 1.6, you need to have 2 keyframes, one near the beginning and one near the end. And if you want to trim this footage before you have it render to save a little bit on time, you can take this little white pull handle at the bottom and slide it forward. A few other things about Real Steady Go is if you wanted to delete a keyframe, you just hover over the green, right click, and you can say delete, and then just move your playhead further into the video, and then pick another keyframe by clicking on this icon. So now it syncs it up to that particular point. And anymore, I don't go into the advanced settings, but when I was first trying to figure it out, there's other videos out there that does a really good job of explaining. I just leave them as normal on my settings. So if you wanted to have the smoothest being low, then what will happen is it won't be cropping in as much on the video and leaving a little bit more of the original flight in there. You notice how the cropping speed is in sync as you move them below. Real Steady feels that if you move your smoothness to low, you're going to have fast cropping speed in order to make it look as smooth as possible. Nurk does a really good video on explaining on all these settings. If for some reason you wanted to have them not being synchronized, you can uncheck this, and now you can freely move your cropping speed as you wish. But like I said, I've left it on the normal settings and it's been working great for me. So pretty much the last thing I do is when I start to import my footage in Final Cut Pro, I've got the footage in here and I want to create a new project. Command N, give the project a name. And the settings that work for me is, instead of doing it as an HD footage, since I originally shot the footage in a 2.7K resolution at 4:3 aspect ratio, Real Steady Go will stretch it out on the sides to make it a 16:9 ratio. So what I do is I change the video to a custom, and I change the resolution to a custom setting of 2704 by width, and then height would be 1520, and I want to make sure my frame rate is 29.97 progressive, or P. The reason why I came at these values is because I did the properties of one of the videos after I got it rendered through Stead Go, and that was the video size. So if I tried any of the other 2K or 4K resolutions over here, it just didn't seem to make the smooth video footage look correct. So these custom settings is what works for me.